The ground shook beneath Veltar's feet as another explosion rocked the mining colony of Kepler 442b. He pressed his scaled hands against the command center's reinforced windows, watching orange flames dance across the settlement's outer walls. The Ravager fleet had arrived 3 days ago, and since then his peaceful world had become a nightmare. Veltar had been running this colony for 23 years. He'd seen meteor strikes, equipment failures, and even the occasional dispute between different alien species working the mines. But nothing like this, nothing that made his stomach twist with pure fear for the 50,000 souls depending on him. "Sir, another section of the Northern Shield has failed," called out his communications officer, a young Altarian named Kexra. Her usually bright blue skin had turned pale with worry. "The Ravagers are pushing through our defensive lines. Through the speakers." Veltar could hear the chaos outside. Families were screaming as they ran toward the underground bunkers. Children were crying for their parents. The sound of laser fire echoed between the buildings as his small security force tried desperately to hold back the pirate boarding parties. The Ravagers weren't just any pirates. They were the worst kind, the type who took pleasure in destruction. They didn't just steal valuable ore and equipment. They hurt people. They destroyed homes. They left nothing but pain and suffering wherever they went. Every civilized world in this sector knew their reputation. "How many people are still on the surface?" Veltar asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "About 8,000, sir. Mostly families in the residential district. They're trying to reach the bunkers, but the Ravagers have blocked several routes." Veltar closed his eyes for a moment. 8,000 innocent people trapped above ground, while monsters rained death from the sky. This wasn't supposed to happen. Kepler 442b was supposed to be safe. It was deep in civilized space, protected by treaties and agreements between a dozen different alien governments. But treaties meant nothing to pirates. "Sir," Kexra's voice was barely a whisper now, "Captain Torval is requesting permission to surrender. His security teams are almost out of ammunition." "No." The word came out harder than Veltar intended. "We don't surrender to animals like these. Send out another distress call. Make it stronger this time." Kexra nodded and turned back to her console. Her fingers moved quickly across the holographic controls, sending their desperate plea across the vast darkness of space. It was their only hope now. Someone, somewhere, had to be listening. Someone had to care enough to help. "This is Kepler 442b mining colony," Kexra spoke into the transmitter, her voice cracking with emotion. "We are under attack by the Ravager fleet. 50,000 civilians are in immediate danger. We have families here, children, elderly. We need immediate military assistance. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we are begging for help." The message shot out into space at faster-than-light speed, carrying their desperate words to every major world within 100 light-years. Veltar had sent similar messages over the past 3 days, but so far, the responses had been disappointing. Most governments claimed they were too far away to help. Others said they didn't have enough ships available, but Veltar wouldn't give up. He couldn't, not when families were counting on him. Another explosion shook the building, this one much closer. Through the windows, Veltar could see Ravager soldiers moving through the streets. They wore black armor and carried weapons that looked more like torture devices than standard military equipment. Some of them were laughing as they destroyed everything in sight. "The main power grid is failing," reported another officer. "If we lose power completely, the bunker life support systems will only last 12 hours. 12 hours. Veltar felt his heart sink. Even if help was coming, 12 hours might not be enough time. The nearest military base was at least 2 days away, and that was if they responded immediately. "Keep sending the distress signal," he ordered. "Every 30 seconds, someone has to answer." As if responding to his words, the communication system crackled to life. Veltar's hopes rose for a moment, but then fell just as quickly when he heard the familiar automated response from the Altarian Republic. "Your distress call has been received and logged. Due to current military commitments, we are unable to provide immediate assistance, sir." Kexra looked up from her console with tears in her large eyes. "That's the 5th rejection today. The Centauri Alliance, the Vegan Confederacy, even the Andromedian peacekeepers, they all have excuses." Veltar slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a small crack in the metal. Excuses! That's all we get while innocent people die. Outside, the sounds of battle were getting closer. The Ravagers had broken through the last defensive line. It wouldn't be long before they reached the command center. Veltar looked around at his small team of officers and technicians. They were scared, but they were still at their posts, still trying to help their people. "Keep sending the signal," he said quietly. "Even if no one comes, at least they'll know we tried. At least they'll know we didn't give up." The message continued to pulse out into the darkness, carrying with it the hopes and fears of 50,000 souls who had nowhere left to run. The communication console kept beeping with incoming messages, but each sound made Veltar's hearts sink deeper. After sending out dozens of distress calls, the responses were finally coming in, and every single one was a rejection. "Message from the Altarian Republic, sir," Kexra announced, her voice flat with exhaustion. She'd been working for 48 hours straight, sending out calls and receiving replies. "They say," and I quote, "insufficient military resources available for deployment to your sector at this time." Veltar wanted to laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. The Altarian Republic had one of the largest fleets in known space. Just last month, they'd sent 3 battle groups to protect a single cargo shipment of luxury goods. But 50,000 innocent lives? Apparently that wasn't worth their time. "What about the Vegan Confederacy?" Veltar asked, though he already knew the answer would be disappointing. "They responded an hour ago." Kexra scrolled through the messages on her screen. Something about territorial complications and needing permission from 4 different governments before they can cross into this sector. They estimate it would take 3 weeks just to get approval. 3 weeks. The colony wouldn't last 3 more days at this rate. Outside the command center windows, Veltar could see smoke rising from the residential districts. The Ravagers had stopped their direct attacks and were now playing with their victims like cats with mice. They knew no help was coming. They could take their time and enjoy the destruction. "Sir," another officer called out from across the room, "the Zentorian Military Command is asking for a detailed strategic assessment before they can consider sending aid. They want to know the exact number of enemy ships, their weapon configurations, and a complete analysis of the tactical situation." Veltar nearly threw his tablet across the room. "A strategic assessment? We're being slaughtered down here. What more do they need to know?" But he knew the truth. This wasn't about needing more information. These governments simply didn't want to risk their own ships and soldiers for a mining colony on the edge of civilized space. Kepler 442b wasn't important enough. The people here weren't valuable enough. The next message came from the Centauri Alliance, and Veltar had been hopeful about this one. The Centauri were known for their strong military and their claims of protecting innocent life throughout the galaxy. Their recruitment posters were famous. "Guardians of Peace, Defenders of Justice." Kexra read the message aloud. "After careful consideration of all factors involved, the Centauri Alliance Command has determined that the strategic value of the Kepler 442b system does not justify the risk assessment required for military intervention." Strategic value. Veltar repeated the words slowly. "We're talking about people, not mining equipment. Children are hiding in bunkers while pirates hunt them for sport, and they're worried about strategic value." The worst rejection came from the Andromedian peacekeepers. For over 1,000 years, they had been the galaxy's moral compass. They were the ones other species looked to when justice was needed. Their motto was carved into monuments on 100 worlds: "Where there is suffering, we will come." The Andromedian response just arrived, Kexra said, and Veltar could hear the disbelief in her voice. "They regret that prior commitments prevent them from providing assistance at this time. They suggest we contact local security forces for help." Local security forces. Veltar almost laughed at the absurdity. Captain Torval's small team of security officers had been overwhelmed on the first day. They were brave, but they were guards, not soldiers. They'd signed up to handle disputes between miners and the occasional smuggler, not fight off an entire pirate fleet. "How many people have we lost?" Veltar asked quietly. "The exact number is hard to determine," came the reply from the colony's medical officer. "At least 3,000 confirmed dead. Maybe twice that number missing or trapped in areas we can't reach. 3,000 people, dead because the galaxy's most powerful civilizations couldn't be bothered to help. Dead because politicians and admirals sitting in comfortable offices, light years away, had decided their lives weren't worth the risk. "Sir, we're getting reports from the Eastern District," another voice called out. "The Ravagers have broken into the school complex. There are still children inside." Veltar closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The school complex housed nearly 500 young ones from different species. Their parents were working in the mines when the attack began, and many of those parents were now dead or missing. Through the communication system, he could hear the sounds of the attack: screaming, crying, the harsh laughter of pirates who enjoyed causing terror. And in the background, the voice of a teacher trying to keep the children calm, telling them everything would be okay. But everything was not okay, and it never would be again. "Send one more message," Veltar said finally. "A general broadcast to anyone who might be listening." Kexra positioned her hands over the controls. "What should I say, sir?" Veltar looked out at his dying colony. Fires burned in 12 different districts. Bodies lay in the streets. The proud mining operation that had taken decades to build was being destroyed in hours by creatures who lived only to hurt others. "Tell them we tried," he said. "Tell them we asked for help and the galaxy turned its back on us. Tell them that when civilized worlds needed us to dig the metals that power their ships and cities, we were here. But when we needed them, they were nowhere to be found." The message went out into space, carrying Veltar's words to every listening post and communication hub within range. It was a message of abandonment and betrayal, a message that would be remembered long after Kepler 442b was nothing but ash and empty buildings. As the colony's last shield generator finally died with a shower of sparks, Veltar prepared for the end. Veltar was preparing to send his final message when Kexra suddenly sat up straight in her chair. Her large eyes were fixed on the sensor display, and her mouth was hanging open in shock. "Sir," she whispered, "something just came out of hyperspace." Veltar rushed to the sensor station, expecting to see more Ravager ships arriving to finish the job. Instead, he saw something that made no sense at all. A fleet of ships was approaching, but they looked nothing like any vessels he'd ever seen before. "What are those things?" he asked, squinting at the display. The ships were rough and angular, built from what looked like basic metal plates welded together. They had none of the smooth, elegant curves of Altarian vessels or the crystalline beauty of Zentorian craft. These ships looked like they had been hammered together in someone's garage. Thick black smoke poured from their engines, and bright orange flames shot out the back. "They're burning chemical fuel," Kexra said in amazement. "I haven't seen anything like that since I studied ancient history in school. Most civilized ships used clean energy cores or antimatter drives. These newcomers were using technology that was thousands of years out of date. But somehow they had managed to cross the vast distances of space to get here. Are they more pirates?" asked one of the officers. Before anyone could answer, the communication system crackled to life. The voice that came through was unlike anything Veltar had heard before. It was warm and friendly, with a strange accent he couldn't place. "This is Admiral Jinwu of the Terran Defense Force," the voice said through heavy static. "We received your distress call. Sorry we're late to the party, but Earth is pretty far from your neighborhood." Veltar's mandibles clicked together in confusion. "Terrans? I've never heard of any Terran species." "Neither had we until about 10 minutes ago," Admiral Jinwu replied, with what sounded like laughter in his voice. "Your message reached our deep space communication station 3 days ago. We've been burning hard to get here ever since. 3 days. These unknown aliens had traveled for 3 days straight to reach a colony they'd never heard of, to help people they'd never met. Meanwhile, the galaxy's most powerful civilizations had refused to send aid that was only hours away." "Admiral Jinwu," Veltar said, trying to keep hope out of his voice. "I must warn you. The Ravager fleet has over 30 warships. They're heavily armed and extremely dangerous. Your ships appear to be, well, old and ugly?" Admiral Jinwu finished with a chuckle. "Yeah, we get that a lot. But don't worry about us. We didn't come all this way just to turn around and leave." On the sensor display, Veltar could see the Ravager ships changing course. They had noticed the newcomers and were moving to intercept them. The pirate fleet was massive compared to these crude Terran vessels. It looked like a pack of wolves preparing to attack a group of sheep. "Sir," Admiral Jinwoo's voice came through again. But this time he wasn't talking to Veltar. He was speaking to his own fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Jinwoo. I want everyone to remember why we're here. Down on that planet are 50,000 innocent people who've been abandoned by everyone else in the galaxy. Families are hiding in bunkers while monsters hunt them for fun." Veltar listened in amazement as the human admiral continued. "The fancy civilizations with their pretty ships and their politics decided these people weren't worth saving. Well, I've got news for them. Every life matters, every family deserves protection, and nobody gets left behind on our watch." The communication channel filled with voices responding to their admiral. Dozens of different humans, all expressing their agreement in ways that ranged from professional acknowledgements to excited shouts of support. "Copy that, Admiral," came one voice. "Ready to show these pirates what humans do." "Jinwoo 6 standing by," called another. "Let's teach these bullies a lesson." "This is Captain Hyunwoo of the destroyer Busan. My crew is ready to dance." Veltar had never heard military communications like this before. When Altarian or Centauri fleets talked, everything was formal and cold. These humans sounded like they were heading to a festival, not a battle that could kill them all. "Admiral," Veltar interrupted, "you should know that your technology appears to be significantly behind that of the Ravagers. Their ships have advanced shields and energy weapons. Are you certain you want to engage?" There was a pause, and then Admiral Jinwoo's voice came back, still warm but now with an edge of steel underneath. "Administrator Veltar, let me tell you something about humans. We might not have the fanciest technology, and our ships might look like flying scrap heaps. But we've got two things that seem to be in short supply out here in your civilized galaxy." "What's that?" Veltar asked. "We've got hearts that don't let us ignore people in trouble, and we've got enough stubbornness to fight impossible odds when something is worth fighting for." "Those families down there? They're worth fighting for." The human fleet continued its approach, their primitive engines leaving trails of fire across the darkness of space. They looked like shooting stars racing towards certain destruction. But something in Admiral Jinwoo's voice made Veltar believe that maybe, just maybe, hope wasn't lost after all. "All ships," Admiral Jinwoo announced. "Let's show this galaxy what happens when you mess with innocent people. Time to get to work." What happened next changed everything Veltar thought he knew about space warfare. The moment the human fleet engaged the Ravagers, it became clear that these Terrans fought nothing like any civilized military force in the galaxy. "What are they doing?" Kexra gasped, staring at the tactical display, instead of forming the traditional battle lines that every military academy taught. The human ships scattered in all directions. Their fighter craft launched in swarms, but they didn't stay in neat formations. They twisted and weaved through space like angry insects, moving in patterns that seemed completely random. "Yuna to flight leader," a young woman's voice crackled, over the open communication channels. "These pirates fly like they're drunk. Look at those lazy turns." "Copy that, Yuna," came the reply from pilot Kyung. "Minho, you seeing this? Their targeting systems can't even track our flight paths." Veltar watched in amazement as the human fighters performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. They spun, rolled, and dove in ways that would have killed any normal pilot from the crushing forces. But somehow these humans not only survived these movements, they seemed to enjoy them. "Wahoo!" shouted pilot Sora over the radio. "Did you see that? I just flew between two Ravager ships and they ended up shooting each other." The Ravager commanders were clearly confused. Their ships kept firing at where the human fighters had been, not where they were going. The pirates were used to fighting civilized forces that moved in predictable patterns and followed established tactics. But the humans fought like wild animals, if wild animals could fly spaceships. "How are they moving like that?" asked one of Veltar's officers. "Those acceleration forces should crush any living being." "I don't know," Veltar replied, "but look at what they're doing to the Ravager formation." The pirate fleet, which had seemed so organized and dangerous just minutes before, was now in complete chaos. Human fighters were everywhere, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. It was like watching a swarm of hornets attack a group of lumbering giants. But the real shock came when the humans opened fire. Instead of the elegant energy beams that most civilized weapons used, The human ships launched crude metal projectiles at incredible speeds. These kinetic rounds punched through Ravager shields like they weren't even there. "That's impossible," Kexra whispered. "Energy shields are supposed to stop everything." "Not if you're shooting solid metal at them fast enough," came Admiral Jinwoo's voice over the communication system. "Sometimes the old ways work best. Fire all batteries." The human capital ships unleashed a barrage that lit up the darkness of space. But these weren't clean energy weapons. They were launching what looked like ancient nuclear warheads, each one leaving a trail of fire as it raced toward its target. When the first nuclear warhead hit a Ravager battleship, the explosion was unlike anything Veltar had ever seen. The blast was raw and violent, tearing through the enemy vessel's hull like paper. Within seconds, the mighty warship was nothing but floating debris. "Nuclear weapons?" Veltar said in shock. "Who still uses nuclear weapons in space combat?" "Apparently, humans do," Kexra replied, "and it's working." The battle was turning into a complete disaster for the Ravagers. Their advanced technology meant nothing against opponents who fought with such unpredictable fury. But the real surprise came when several Ravager ships managed to board one of the human vessels. Veltar expected to see the human ship quickly overwhelmed. Ravager boarding parties were legendary for their cruelty and effectiveness. These pirates had conquered hundreds of ships over the years, but the sounds that came over the communication channels told a very different story. "This is Sergeant Hannah," came a calm female voice. "We've got uninvited guests in Section 7. Marines, let's show them some hospitality." What followed was not the quick victory the Ravagers expected. Instead, the sounds of combat grew more and more desperate from the pirate side. The humans weren't just defending their ship. They were hunting the boarders like prey. "Contacts moving through Deck 3, reported another Marine. "They're trying to reach the engine room. Not today." "They're not," Sergeant Hannah replied. "J1, take your team and cut them off. Sunho set up that surprise we talked about." The human Marines fought with a ferocity that terrified even the hardened pirates. When Ravagers breached a bulkhead expecting to find cowering defenders, they instead found soldiers who seemed to enjoy close combat. The humans didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when things looked hopeless. They just kept fighting with a determination that bordered on madness. "Ma'am," came a panicked voice over what must have been a Ravager communication channel, "these humans are insane. They're actually charging our positions with knives." "Fall back to the landing bay," ordered what sounded like a Ravager commander. "We need to get off this ship now." But there was no falling back. The humans had turned their own ship into a trap, using their knowledge of every corridor and maintenance shaft to outmaneuver the invaders. Within an hour, the boarding party had been completely eliminated. "Boarding party neutralized," Sergeant Hannah reported with satisfaction. "Ship secure. Ready for the next wave." Veltar stared at the tactical display in wonder. The mighty Ravager fleet, which had terrorized this sector for years, was being systematically destroyed by a group of aliens no one had ever heard of. These humans fought with weapons that seemed ancient, tactics that appeared chaotic, and a spirit that seemed unbreakable, and they were winning. 6 hours after the first human ship had appeared on sensors, the space around Kepler 442b looked completely different. Where once the massive Ravager fleet had circled like hungry predators, now only scattered debris floated in the darkness. Some Ravager ships had been destroyed completely. Others had fled after realizing they were fighting an enemy unlike anything they'd ever encountered. The human fleet now orbited the planet peacefully, their rough metal ships looking almost gentle against the backdrop of stars. Down on the surface, the real work had begun. Veltar walked through the colony's main square, still hardly believing what he was seeing. Just this morning, this area had been a war zone filled with smoke and terror. Now, human Marines moved among the colonists, handing out food, medical supplies, and blankets to families who had lost everything. "Here you go, little one," said Lieutenant Nari, kneeling down to hand a meal pack to a young Zentorian child. The child looked up at the human with wide, curious eyes, no longer afraid. "Your parents are safe now. The bad people are gone, Captain." Tyke was nearby, organizing the distribution of emergency shelters for families whose homes had been destroyed. His Marines worked alongside colony volunteers, and Veltar noticed something remarkable. The humans weren't just giving orders or dropping off supplies. They were staying to help build, to comfort, to make sure everyone was taken care of. Administrator Veltar called out a familiar voice. Veltar turned to see Admiral Jinwoo approaching, his uniform dusty from helping to clear debris from a collapsed building. The human leader didn't look like any Admiral Veltar had ever met. Most military commanders stayed clean and distant from the actual work. But Jinwoo had spent the last 3 hours helping rescue trapped colonists with his bare hands. "Admiral," Veltar said, still struggling to process everything that had happened, "I don't know how to thank you. Your people saved us when no one else would." "No thanks needed," Jinwoo replied with a warm smile. "This is what neighbors do for each other." They walked together toward the Eastern District, where human engineers were already working to restore power to the residential areas. Children from a dozen different alien species followed the human soldiers around, fascinated by these strange new protectors who laughed and joked while they worked. "I have to ask," Veltar said, as they watched a group of human pilots showing some young colonists how their fighter ships worked. "Your technology is clearly primitive compared to what the major civilizations use. Your ships are crude, your weapons are ancient by galactic standards. How did you defeat the Ravagers so easily?" Admiral Jinwoo was quiet for a moment, watching. As pilot Yuna lifted a small Altarian girl up so she could see inside the cockpit of her fighter. The child was giggling with delight, and Yuna was explaining how the controls worked with the patience of a teacher. "You know," Jinwoo said finally, "every advanced civilization in this galaxy sent us the same basic message when they rejected your call for help. They all had good reasons. Not enough resources, too far away, not strategically important enough. All very logical explanations." He paused and pointed to where Sergeant Hana was bandaging the injured arm of an elderly colonist. "But maybe logic isn't everything," Jinwoo continued. "Maybe our ships are old and ugly. Maybe our weapons are primitive, but we've got something that seems to be in short supply out here among all these advanced civilizations." "What's that?" Veltar asked, genuinely curious. "We show up," Jinwoo said simply. "When someone calls for help, we come. It doesn't matter if they're strangers. It doesn't matter if it's dangerous. It doesn't matter if there's nothing in it for us. We show up because it's the right thing to..." Veltar looked around at the human Marines, who were still working even though the battle was over. They were sharing their own food with hungry colonists. They were using their medical supplies to treat the wounded. They were giving their spare blankets to families who had lost their homes. "The galaxy has become very good at calculating costs and benefits," Jinwoo continued. "Everyone wants to know what they'll gain before they decide to help. But sometimes the right thing to do is also the unprofitable thing to do." Within hours of the battle's end, word began spreading through galactic communication networks. The story was almost unbelievable. An unknown species called humans had traveled across space to save a colony that every major civilization had abandoned. They had defeated the feared Ravager fleet with primitive technology and old-fashioned courage. In government buildings across dozens of worlds, politicians and military leaders scrambled to find information about these mysterious Terrans. Who were they? Where had they come from? And most importantly, what did they want? But the humans didn't seem to want anything. They had already begun preparing to leave Kepler 442b, refusing any payment for their help. They left behind some supplies and a communication frequency with simple instructions. "If you need help again, just call." As Admiral Jinwoo's fleet prepared to depart, Veltar stood at his command center window one last time. The human ships were as ugly and crude as ever, but now they looked different to him. They looked like hope. "Sir," Kexra said softly, "I'm receiving messages from 17 different news networks. They all want to know about the humans." Veltar smiled. "Tell them the truth. Tell them there's a new voice in the galaxy. A people who answer calls that others ignore. A species that believes every life has value." As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving trails of fire against the stars, Veltar knew that everything had changed. The galaxy would never be quite the same. They called themselves humanity, and they had shown up when no one else would.